welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving straight into quite a thought-provoking idea from Georgia 57's YouTube presentation, proving causal will in real time.
Ah, yes, causal will.
Exactly. We're going to explore this notion that, well, maybe our choices aren't as freely made as we tend to believe.
Right, the idea that they actually arise from this whole chain reaction of prior causes, it's a big one.
It is, and what's really interesting, I think, is how George tries to show this concept, like as the presentation is actually happening.
Yeah, it's a unique approach, using the recording itself as a sort of real-time lab for this huge philosophical question.
Totally. And the setup for the recording itself gives us our first example, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, George had planned to do the show with his co-host, Nomi, and some guests apparently.
Okay.
But Nomi couldn't make it, unforeseen circumstances.
Ah, right. So that itself wasn't planned.
Exactly. It's kind of meta, isn't it? A non-freely willed event directly impacting a show about non-free will.
Huh. Yeah, that is pretty neat.
And George himself says, he would have preferred Nomi to be there. So him doing it solo wasn't really his initial freely chosen path.
It highlights right away how external factors can just push things in a certain direction, regardless of what we want.
Yeah, it really grounds the whole discussion immediately, like you said, in something tangible.
Yeah.
An intention gets altered by something totally outside his control.
Okay, got it.
Then he mentions the show must go on. It's the reason he decided to proceed alone anyway.
Right, that old chestnut.
But let's unpack that for a second. Where does that feeling even come from, that drive, that sense of obligation?
Good question. His upbringing, maybe.
Yeah.
Or just, professional norms.
Could be anything, right? But it's a great example of how our actions can be pushed by these deep-seated influences, things we might not even think of as choices in that specific moment.
Yeah, it definitely brings up the question of where our motivations actually originate. These, background principles often steer us in ways that feel almost automatic.
Yeah, automatic or maybe predetermined by this whole web of past stuff and what society expects.
A complex web, for sure.
And even his clothes, he's wearing a t-shirt and jeans, super casual. He frames that as a deliberate choice too, but again, one driven by a specific goal. He wanted to appeal to a college audience.
Ah, okay. Thinking about maybe getting it on college TV stations.
Exactly. So the choice serves an outcome. It's guided by who he thinks the audience is. It's not just, I feel like wearing jeans today.
So even seemingly simple choices have these underlying causal reasons.
That's the argument. And this is where it gets really interesting, because he then sets out to demonstrate this causal will during the recording.
Right, the self-referential thing. He's using the act of making the video as Exhibit A.
Precisely. So one of the first points he brings up is how our thoughts just seem to appear. Think about it yourself. You're just going about your day, and bam, a thought pops into your head. Did you consciously line that thought up and say, okay, you're next?
Probably not. It does often feel like they just emerge, doesn't it? Not like picking something off a mental menu.
Yeah, unbidden is a good word for it.
It resonates with, I think, how most people experience their own minds.
And then he mentions his own communication skills. He says something like, if he truly had free will, he thinks he'd be much better at explaining things.
Interesting. So it's that feeling of limitation.
Yeah, exactly. That feeling of, I want to be more eloquent, but I just can't will myself to be. It shows that gap between what we wish we could do and what we actually can do.
Right. Suggesting our abilities are constrained by things beyond just our immediate wanting, like innate talent or lack thereof, skills we've learned, or even just how we're feeling right then.
And then comes this fantastic real-time moment. He asks the director, live on camera, to make more camera changes.
Okay, why?
He thinks it'll make the show more dynamic, look better, a conscious choice for improvement.
Makes sense.
But then, the camera changes actually distract him. He completely loses his train of thought for a second.
Oh.
And he points to that right there as evidence. His intention to make the show better with camera changes led directly to an unintended consequence, getting distracted.
So a lack of complete control over his own focus, even when he initiated the change.
Exactly. The takeaway isn't just, oh, he got distracted. It's that his deliberate attempt to improve things had this unforeseen negative effect on his own mental process.
That's a really powerful, in-the-moment illustration. His attempt to control one thing impacts another cognitive thing unexpectedly. Shows that interconnectedness.
Yeah, and how maybe our mental gears aren't these isolated things we have perfect command over.
Yeah.
Especially when interacting with the outside world or even just camera changes.
Right. It suggests that will isn't operating in a vacuum.
Following that, he sort of shifts to the implications of this idea, like how understanding causal will could change how we think about blame and responsibility.
How so?
Well, if our actions are really just the result of all these prior causes stretching way back,
Yeah.
then maybe it's harder to just put 100% blame on someone, or even ourselves, when things don't go the way we willed them to.
Ah, okay. So it could lead to perhaps a more compassionate view, less judgment.
That seems to be the idea. Maybe more acceptance, less resentment, if you recognize all the complex stuff that leads to any outcome, both in others and, importantly, in ourselves.
That could be quite significant, actually.
Then, almost on cue, he has this moment where he just stops. He doesn't know what to say next. Blank space.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. But then in this really meta way, he catches himself and says, see, this right here, this inability to just choose a thought to say next, that's an example of the lack of free will.
Wow. Using the stumble itself.
Yeah. He couldn't just conjure the words on demand. It really drives home that feeling, doesn't it? That our thoughts aren't always just there for the taking when we command them.
That's a very striking way to put it. The feeling of trying to grasp a thought that just isn't there.
Then he switches gears a bit, brings in more external factors. He mentions he's feeling cold.
Okay.
Because someone else controls the thermostat in the room.
Ah. So an external physical factor influencing his internal state.
Exactly. And he connects that simple thing to bigger external forces, like, the weather, how these things we don't control affect our mood, our feelings.
Which then affects our thoughts and actions. It's all connected.
It's like this ripple effect. It's not just our internal mental world suggesting this causal chain, it's the physical environment too, even the room temperature.
Yeah, that makes sense. It broadens the scope of these influences.
He also makes a brief mention, touches on a Buddhist concept.
Oh, which one?
The idea that the individual self is, well, kind of an illusion.
Ah, Ananta, no self.
Right. He doesn't go deep into it, but he brings it up to emphasize our interconnectedness, how we're tied up with our environment, with other people, with external influences.
And that resonates, definitely. If there's no fixed, independent self doing the choosing, it supports the idea that we're shaped by these wider forces. The boundaries of our will become blurry.
Chorus, yeah. It fits the causal will argument quite well, even just as a side note.
Interesting connection.
Then he gets back to really concrete, everyday examples. Sleep and diet.
Ah, okay. Related stuff.
Totally. He notes how getting good sleep the night before clearly helped him present his ideas.
Sure. We all know that feeling.
And also how skipping breakfast that morning was affecting his physical state, maybe his energy, maybe his focus during the recording itself.
Right. So choices or maybe just circumstances from the past, like getting enough sleep or eating, having direct, tangible effects on the present moment and his performance.
Exactly. These aren't abstract philosophical points anymore. They're physical realities impacting his ability to function and think right then and there.
Makes the concept much less abstract, more grounded.
Let's go back for a second to his choice about the college audience.
Okay, the t-shirt and jeans choice.
Well, the choice to target them in the first place. He explains it wasn't just a random idea.
Right. You mentioned the college TV stations.
Yeah, and also his perception, his belief that college students are generally more open to new or unconventional ideas like causal will. So he argues this choice wasn't some act of pure, untethered free will. It was a logical consequence of the information he had and the opportunities he perceived.
So deconstructing the choice again, revealing the reasoning and the external factors that made that particular path seem the most sensible one for him at that time.
Precisely. Which leads right into his core argument, really.
Which is?
That humans are, in his words, compelled by nature to always do what makes the most sense to them at the time.
Right. Even if later, with hindsight, it looks like a terrible decision.
Exactly. Hindsight is 20/20. But in that moment, given your knowledge, your feelings, your circumstances, you do what seems like the best, or maybe the only option.
That's a really key point. Our actions are driven by that perceived rationality or benefit in the moment, based on everything that makes us who we are right then.
Yeah. And he uses this really powerful analogy to drive it home.
Okay.
He says he feels like an actor. An actor following a script that's already been written.
Written by?
By the causal past. Everything that has ever happened leading up to that exact moment.
Wow. That really emphasizes the feeling of Well, a lack of genuine autonomy, doesn't it?
Completely, like you're just playing out a role determined by all the preceding scenes.
The actor analogy is quite stark. It captures that sense of being carried along by this chain of cause and effect.
Then he brings in a pretty interesting comparison. He links it to religious concepts,
Oh, like what?
specifically the idea of an all-powerful God, omnipotence.
Okay, how does that connect?
Well, he explores that apparent contradiction.
Yeah.
If God is all-powerful, how can humans truly have free will?
Ah, the classic theological problem.
Right, and he even touches on that paradox, can God create a boulder so heavy you can't lift it?
Yeah, the challenge to the very notion of absolute, unlimited power or will.
So by bringing that in, he's highlighting the deep philosophical difficulties in trying to reconcile absolute control or causality with genuine freedom, whether you're talking about God or us.
It's a thought-provoking parallel. It underscores the inherent tensions in these concepts.
And finally, near the end, he talks about what he calls hedonic and moral imperatives.
I mean,
Basically, that we seem to be sort of hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, the hedonic bit.
okay, sounds familiar.
And also that we have some kind of innate moral compass, a drive to generally do good.
An inherent morality.
That's the suggestion. And here's the twist. He frames this not as proof of free will, but as a potentially positive aspect of not having it.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
His point is, if we don't have free will, maybe these built-in drives, seek pleasure, avoid pain, do good, are what guide us. They steer us almost automatically toward improvement.
Ah, I see. So even without free will making choices, we have this underlying programming that generally pushes us in positive directions, individually and collectively.
That's the idea he puts forward. It reframes the lack of free will, not just as a limitation, but maybe as a kind of beneficial structure. We're nudged towards better outcomes.
That's actually a surprisingly optimistic take on causal will. Instead of randomness, there's a kind of inherent positive drift guided by these fundamental drives.
Yeah, a built-in directionality, maybe.
Interesting.
So just to sort of wrap it all up, Georgia 57 basically walked through all these moments, his co-host being absent, his own thoughts appearing, the camera distraction, feeling cold, forgetting his words.
Right, all these real-time observations.
And use them, along with his reasoning, to argue that our wills are, in fact, causal. They're determined by prior events, not freely chosen in the moment.
It's a compelling case built through lived examples during the presentation itself.
And he finishes with this real sense of enthusiasm, doesn't he? He seems genuinely convinced that understanding this could be revolutionary.
Yeah, beneficial for humanity. That it could lead to more understanding, more compassion, maybe change how we see everything from justice to personal relationships.
He's definitely optimistic about the potential impact if people really grasped this idea of causal will.
A more enlightened future, perhaps. Deeper understanding of why we do what we do.
It certainly leaves you with a lot to chew on, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Makes you think about your own present moment right now, the thoughts you're having listening to this, the decisions you'll make later today.
Are they all just part of this immense chain of cause and effect?
It's a perspective that really invites you to look differently at the forces shaping our lives. A provocative thought to end on.